8 weeks ago, a Dutch publishing company edited a book, big like this. I didn't bring it because it would be too expensive for me to bring it in my hand luggage. But a book big like this, a biography of the socialist former president of France, François Mitterrand. And seemingly this biography was written by a Swiss diplomat, Vincent Gounod, living in Lausanne somewhere. And immediately after this book was published and was distributed in bookshops in Holland and in Belgium, in Flanders, it was an enormous success in the media. It was described very favorably. A Dutch quality newspaper described this book about socialist former president, the jewel of a biography, the sensation of 2009. And Flemish public radio praised it for 10 minutes, which is long on radio, for 10 minutes as an exceptional book. Why do I tell you this? This was 2 months ago. Because 2 weeks ago, something happened. 2 weeks ago, by accident, I fear that it turned out that the author of this book, Vincent Gounod, the Swiss diplomat, did not exist, in fact, and that the real author of the book was Koen Dillon, a member of parliament of my party, the Vlaams Belang. You might think this is not so exceptional, not so very interesting, even though it's something strange because most politicians have published under their name books which are written by somebody else. And this is a politician who actually wrote the book but had it published under another name, but nothing special in general. But then you are not familiar with what is happening with the state of political correctness in my country. Because from the moment that the real identity of the author of this exceptional book was known, the machinery of political correctness was started, which meant that all bookshops in my country, more or less by self-decision, took the work from their shelves and sent them back to the editor. Today you can find it only if you are very lucky, like pornography in the 80s in our country, under the counter, or if you are lucky and you find a nice bookseller, you can still order it by special order. In my country, publications, books which are not politically correct or which are not written by a politically correct author can only be distributed by ways of very limited alternative channels, like it was in the, more or less like it was in the Soviet Union with the Samizdat publications. I'll give you an example. The Book of Philip was edited, Book of Philip Inshallah, which he talked just a few moments ago, was edited by an editing company, Egmont, which is quite an active book editing company, but not politically correct. So this company is forbidden entrance to for instance, to the National Yearly Book Fair, because it edits non-politically correct books which have to be somewhere sold under the counter. Books are not burned anymore in Belgium, and there is not even, for many years now, there is not even what was called the index of the church, the index of books which you should not read. All that does not exist anymore, but that does not mean that there is no censorship. On the contrary, they don't have to burn books anymore, because books are simply not published or not distributed in my country. The cultural elite in Flanders is a massively subsidized club of apparatchiks of the left church, and they are pursuing a policy of censorship. Why did I start with this example? Not because it's world-shaking, but because it's so typical, and also because it's the most recent example of this iceberg of political correctness in my country. I am quite certain, for instance, that Belgium is the only state in Western Europe, or in the Western democracies, where quite recently, end of 2004, the biggest, the most popular, the party with the most votes of all parties in the country, the party which represents 24% of the voters. I'm sure that Belgium is the only country where such a party was outlawed after a long series of political trials. The history of this ban of my party illustrates perfectly the repressive nature of the Belgian state. My party was founded, I thought about this just a few minutes ago while I was looking at Philip speaking, because he has grown very grey, as you have seen. But 30 years ago, when the party was founded, me myself, I have kept quite the same for 30 years. Our party was founded 30 years ago, in October 1977. And during those long 30 years, we have always, of course, operated within the normal functioning of a normal parliamentary democracy, without any preaching or using of violence. What are we? We are essentially a party defending our identity. We defend Flemish identity, we defend our Dutch language, we defend the idea to govern our country like we wish, but in a democratic way. We defend the idea to establish an independent state of Flanders, member of the European Union, but we defend our right eventually to refuse to transfer a number of essential political competences to the European Union. We defend our right to defend fundamental Flemish and European values and standards. We think that Turkey does not belong to the European Union. We stand for a separation between the church and the state. We stand for the equality of men and women. We stand for freedom of speech. We are living in one of the most densely populated areas of the world, and we are thus very concerned about the continuing and very massive influx of non-European immigrants into our country, and we are very worried about the growing pressure and presence of an intolerant and imperialist Islam in our society. That's what we are, generally speaking. What we depict as the immigration problem, and the immigration problem, even just speaking these words, is already politically very incorrect in Belgium, because you have to speak about multicultural enrichment. But what we call the immigration problem is undoubtedly, we think, the most pressing, the most serious challenge of the years and decades to come. And in any case, even with the situation as we know now, our country, the people of our country, are already very severely hit by this immigration invasion. Unfortunately, Belgium has the most lenient, the most lax nationality code in the world. It's called the Easy Belgian Law. To give you an idea, Belgium has 10 million inhabitants. Only in the last 10 years, 600,000 new immigrants received Belgian nationality through this excellent piece of legislation, the Easy Belgian Law. And this is dramatic. And developments are going faster and faster. 2007, 2 years ago, small country, 10 million inhabitants. 2 years ago, we received 110,000 legal new immigrants from outside the European Union. 2008, what we have now, 90,000 new immigrants, legal immigrants from outside the European Union. You have to add to that, of course, the illegals and the asylum seekers, which are also come in with tens of thousands every year. Today, as Philip told you, today almost 60% of the inhabitants of the European capital, Brussels, are of non-European origin. In 20 years, that will be 75% of the inhabitants of the European capital of non-European origin. Our country, our cities, are very rapidly losing their identity. And because the immigration is so massive, so uncontrolled, the newcomers do not integrate or assimilate anymore, and it's quite the contrary. More and more, the native population are asked to adapt to the newcomers. In the schools of Antwerp, for instance, halal food has now become obligatory for all school children. In many swimming pools, separated swimming for boys and girls is introduced automatically at the demand of Islamists. I know it's only two small examples, but they illustrate perfectly what is going on in our country. And at the same time, something very worrying is happening. At the same time, the so-called anti-racism and anti-discrimination laws are sharpened and tightened in such a way that the real terror of political correctness is installed. I told you that our party, the Vlaams Belang, the Vlaams Blok, was outlawed at the end of 2004. This was only possible, in fact, because our political opponents changed the Belgian law 6 times just to hit and liquidate us. The new laws were written more or less on our body, on our program. Even the Belgian constitution had to be changed to be able to condemn our party. Because the constitution foresaw, since 1834, that press criminal offenses, offenses made in writing by publications, that these press criminal offenses should be judged by the jury of 12 citizens. And of course you can think that Belgium, that our political opponents weren't very sure that the jury, popular jury, would condemn the most popular party of the country. So they amended this law and made it possible to have us condemned by appointed judges. After all these amendments, 6 normal changes of the law, 1 change of the constitution, we were successively summoned to 5 different courts of law in a procedure that took more than 5 years. And in the beginning, we were quite lucky, because in the beginning we were each time acquitted. And the successive, courageous judges, much to my surprise, I have to add, stated that there was not a single proof, I quote, there is not a single proof of discrimination or racism in our program, and they very firmly spoke out against what they literally called a political trial. In April 2004, however, after 4 or 5 years, we appeared before an exceptionally, for us, composed 5th court, because the Prime Minister of Belgium said, after the 4th time we were acquitted, the Prime Minister of Belgium, and together with the President of the so-called anti-racist organization, said, now we are going to look for a court of judges who is prepared to condemn these men. So the 5th time we appeared before an exceptionally composed 5th court of law, which tried and convicted us in record speed, 5 days. And one of the pieces of evidence, one of the main pieces of evidence used against us was an article in a local party magazine written by a local member of the Vlaams Belang, a woman, nota bene of Turkish origin, a woman of Turkish origin who wrote in one of her papers, and she condemned the practice of genital mutilation of women in Muslim countries. And the judge stated that this was to be seen, this protest against genital mutilation of women in Muslim countries, coming from our side, should be seen as an appeal to racism, said the learned judge. However, we were still, even after this condemnation, because we went in appeal, we were still able to participate in the elections from 5 years ago, June 2004, which were a very clear victory, because 1 in 4 of the Flemish voters, 24% of the Flemish voters, supported the forbidden party, making it the biggest party of the country, which did mean that just a few months later we had obligatory to disband the party and to establish, to found a new party, the Vlaams Belang. But even this Vlaams Belang, which exists now for a few years, Since Philip de Winter said a few years ago that he wouldn't consider it very grave to be called an Islamophobic, since that time, and because of that, we are again dragged into a very long history of judicial battles. And history repeats itself, because this time they are not taking the risk of having 3 or 4 or 5 courts not condemning us. This time they have made a special law which says that we have to defend us not for a Flemish court, but for a bilingual court of Flemish and Walloon, French-speaking judges. So you can easily say that half of the judges don't even understand the language of the party they have to judge. And what's more, it's a court of law. Could be a joke, looks like something out of a movie, I think. But it's a court of law, 100% composed of purely politically appointed judges. Judges literally named, literally appointed by our political enemies in the parliaments. So again, we are implicated in a very difficult and very long judicial battle. It's important to know, when I tell you all this, it's important to know that we are not something like an obscure band of extremists. I think quite the contrary. I told you at the European and Flemish elections 5 years ago, we obtained 24% of the vote. At the municipal elections of 2006, we had more than 1,800 people locally elected in Flemish cities and communities. In the most recent elections of 2007, parliamentary elections, we obtained almost 20% of the vote. We have, at this moment, we still have the largest political group in the Flemish parliament. We have considerable representation in the Belgian House of Representatives and the Senate. We have 3 out of 13 Flemish members of the European Parliament. All this does not prevent the Belgian regime to discriminate us and literally to try to liquidate us. 15 years ago, at the proposal of the Green Party, which is in our country an extreme left-wing party, a so-called cordon sanitaire was installed against us. I don't know if you know this term, cordon sanitaire. It's a French term that originates from the agricultural sector. When in a farm, when a farm is hit by swine fever, by a very contagious animal disease, a cordon sanitaire is put around the farm and nobody is allowed to approach the farm because of the danger of contagious of the disease. But this term was used, and is still used today, the cordon sanitaire, because at the demand of the extreme left-wing Green Party, all Belgian political parties signed an agreement to put the cordon sanitaire around the biggest Flemish party, which means that all parties officially have committed themselves never to conclude any deal with us, but not only this, have officially decided that they would act as if we did not exist, which even means that half of our colleagues in Parliament, socialists, Greens, and even quite a few liberals, refuse to greet us, to shake hands. Just do as if we were not ghosts, as if we were ghosts and did not exist, something very strange. And from the moment that we became the biggest party in the Flemish Parliament, new official rules were created for the information programs of the Flemish radio and television broadcasting. Journalists were officially given the right and were even asked to discriminate and exclude as much as possible politicians of the Vlaams Bloc from the political journalism. journalism who refuse to follow this rule are severely reprimanded by their superiors. Actually, what it comes to in Belgium at this moment is this. The immigration problem is considered to be a taboo. And the messengers of the bad news have to be symbolically shot. Belgium is ill and has a fever, but they want to cure this by breaking the thermometer. I myself, I have to say, I'm also personally a little bit under fire. I have a little problem. One of the new laws that they made was a law stating that someone who is personally convicted for incitement to racism or to incitement to discrimination automatically loses his political rights. Now, I am already politically active for 31 years. I have been a member of parliament for 15 years. I have been the party president for 12 years. In all those years, I have written hundreds of articles. I have made probably thousands of very boring speeches on the most diverse subjects. But even with the most stringent control of the regime, in all that I wrote or said, never once did the regime find something to drag me personally before a court of law. But today I am prosecuted because 4 years ago, in one of the very local party publications of a very local city, an article appeared, an article big like this, in total 136 words, just a few lines, which stated that locally the offenders of an history of vandalism on a Christian cemetery, this article stated that the authors of this vandalism of the cemetery were youthful immigrants, under age, less than 18 years old immigrants, and that the article said that, more generally speaking, we should know that there is a problem with Islamists who do not respect Christian traditions. Okay, you might find this not so very worrying, but when our legal services found out what had been published locally by this local man of our party in this local newspaper, they were very worried because we do not have free speech anymore in Belgium. And they asked me, they obliged me to distribute rectification in all letterboxes and all households of the city where this article had appeared, wherein I, as president of the party, I offered my apologies. I said we did not have the right to divulge the identity or the nationality or the religion of underage people who committed whatever, and I offered my apologies. You might think that this was enough for the Belgian politically correct authorities, but no. The Belgian judicial authorities and the Minister of Justice personally decided to prosecute me. But they didn't prosecute me immediately, because they waited for 2 years. They waited for 2 years until I resigned as national chairman of the party in March 2007, a year ago. And 2 days after my resignation as national chairman, I received the fact that I am now prosecuted. This is already a remarkable thing, and I insist on this anecdote. Why? Because Belgian constitution again foresees that an editor of a journal, a responsible editor, can never be prosecuted when the author of the thing he has published is known and lives in Belgium. Well, the author of these 136 words I spoke about is well known. He came forward himself. He's a local elected member of our party. He accepts his responsibility in this probably horrible crime. But he is not interesting enough for the Belgian state. The Office of the Public Prosecutor declared, and I quote, "We are only interested in prosecuting the former president of the political party Vlaams Belang, for which they had a problem. Because until today, I am a member of the European Parliament and I have the pleasure of enjoying parliamentary immunity. So you might think that members of the European Parliament, when the waiver of the immunity of a colleague is asked for such a completely unimportant, foolish thing, that they would defend their colleague. You think wrong. Because I had the right to defend myself in the European Parliament before the Commission, who looks into these matters and proposes a point of view to the Parliament. In this Commission, you should know that the file against me contains some 270 pages. I had the right to defend myself for exactly 15 minutes. 4 members of the Commission accepted to hear my defense. When my defense was finished, the other 20 members entered the room and they voted at one courageous man. Only one courageous man voted against the waiver of my immunity. The history wasn't finished yet, because when European Parliament takes away the immunity of a member of Parliament, he has the right to be defended in the plenary session just before the plenary vote about this thing. But in my case, they did something else. The Bureau of the Parliament, big groups of the Parliament, decided unanimously that just for this time, there would be no such debate, no such possibility to be defended for 3 minutes, by the way, but not even that. And they said, listen, it's not only against him, it's not only against this right-wing politician, because at the same time, another thing is to be considered, the waiver of the immunity of an Italian socialist member of Parliament who was suspected of fiscal fraud, which is true. But the big difference was that the Italian socialist who was suspected of stealing money, there the opinion of the Parliament and of the Commission was not to waiver his immunity, so he didn't have to be defended. Whereas in my case, of course, was quite different. This is the way they do things in the European Parliament. Happily, we have quite good lawyers in Flanders, and I have now started a procedure before the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which makes it possible for me to be candidate in the next European election. But of course, this is only gaining some time, and I have no illusions at all about the outcome of the whole thing. And I might add to that if tomorrow or next month or in a year I will not be a member of Parliament anymore, I suppose the world will still be turning and the sun will still be shining. Ladies and gentlemen, by bringing you these few examples, and I'm very grateful that you were ready to listen to me on this very beautiful day, but by bringing you these few examples, I try to illustrate that in my country, in Flanders, Belgium, fundamental rights, fundamental freedoms are in danger. And the key questions today are, do we still have the right to plead in a peaceful way for an immigration stop in one of the most densely populated countries of the world? Do we still have the right to speak about, in my opinion, the immense dangers of the advance of Islam in our society? Do we still have the right to defend the identity of our country and of our people? Do we still have the right to stand for simple values like the separation of the church and the state, freedom of speech, the equality of men and women? In Belgium, these fundamental rights, these freedoms, these liberties are in danger, and I fear that other European countries follow the Belgian example. I think it's time to stand up for our freedom, and I think we should all listen to the appeal made by Tolkien in his famous Lord of the Rings: men and women of the West, stand up and fight. Thank you.
very much, and even though this day is a very nice day, it was not something that was very nice to listen to. I think we're still working on the technicalities of showing the video. There may be a chance we can see it after the break, so why don't we have a cup of coffee and start again in about 20 minutes.